Okay. So, hello everybody, and thank you for coming to our event this evening. We have a wonderful night planned for you. Tonight, we will meet Denver Detective Sam Howe as he tries to solve one of Denver's murders. During the event, we ask that you stay muted except during audience participation portions, and you are welcome to turn on or off your cameras. It's totally up to you. We do ask that you turn them on just for a moment so that we can capture the total number of people who are here for funding purposes. So thank you so much for that. And now let's get the evening started.
Okay, I can't hear him.
Yeah, can't hear him.
Okay. So let's see if we need to share the audio or.
So you were asking me about my record books. Let's see. I started keeping them around 1873. I actually got the idea from some folks in your line of work. I noticed some reporters were capturing newspaper clippings and filing them, organizing them for different subjects. And it kind of made sense to me that that would be useful in our line of work with our criminals as well. So first I was just capturing some information in here. Then I started adding photos, and next thing I knew I had multiple volumes. And there are two basic sets. One set is for thieves, thugs, those sort of folks, and another set that's just for murders.
Murder? How gruesome! Can you tell me about a time when you used the books to solve a crime?
Yes, I can. Let me think. Yes, there was one case where there were suspects aplenty, and they were all in the same house. And I was called out there. We went to the house, and next thing I knew, I was engrossed in a murder inquiry.
It's such a shame your father couldn't make it this evening, Hadley.
Oh, yes, Father sent word that his business in New York is going quite well.
And thank goodness your mother and father moved here when they did. I certainly couldn't have kept the business going with all these elements that keep popping up, and I couldn't have made it all the way up to New York.
Oh, and of course it's so nice that you are here as well. That's such a lovely perfume you're wearing tonight. I swear I've smelled it before, but I can't quite put my finger on where.
Oh, thank you, Aunt Emily, but I doubt you've ever encountered it anywhere before, especially since Lawrence had it made specifically for me last time he was in Paris. It really is one of a kind.
Oh, how thoughtful of him. You certainly are unique yourself.
Oh, this blasted stomach! This damn cancer won't let me finish one meal.
How about I warm you up some milk? You know how that soothes your stomach.
No, don't. Let Ida or Belle do that. That's why they were brought on, to take some of the burden away from you. You have worked so hard to take care of me these past months.
You know it's not a burden, John. I am your wife. It's one of my duties that I enjoy. Really, Mrs. Witter? Mr. Witter hired me specifically. Yes, he did. He hired you specifically after I specifically asked him not to. Silly man, always trying to help. Well, I am perfectly capable of heating up some warm milk for my husband. Excuse me. Cook, could you please warm some milk up for Mr. Witter?
Oh, John, I do hope that your stomach troubles won't stop you from taking me on that carriage ride later. I do so enjoy our carriage rides together.
Oh, no, my dear. I enjoy our time together, and it is important to keep family very close.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Family, yes, our family does seem particularly close, don't they? Here, John, I hope this makes you feel better.
I spoke with Father the other day, Uncle John. He mentioned that you two went to the lawyer together before he left on Tuesday. I do hope nothing was the matter.
Yes, I thought it was best that I start to get my affairs in order, so to speak. I hadn't updated my will since dear Millie was born, and I don't know what would happen to the business if something were ever to happen to me. My dear, that reminds me, on your way home tomorrow from your calls, can you stop by the pharmacist? The medications that Dr. Wheeler ordered are ready.
Of course, my dear.
Shall we go now, John?
Yes, I'm feeling better. Let's be off.
Please don't stay out too late, John.
My dear.
Thank you.
My dearest Emily, it's so lovely that Hiram and I can move to town last year. With John's health conditions, it seems like we've barely seen you since your wedding. Hiram has so enjoyed being close to John again. You were both so young when you moved out here to the Wild West. I read the most shocking tale in the newspaper yesterday, why Josephine Barnaby died after drinking from a bottle of poisoned whiskey. It turns out she received the bottle in the mail from a Dr. Graves in Rhode Island. Josephine was just visiting Denver at the time. Dr. Graves was after a large bequest in her will. Some people will resort to anything for money. Sam Howe was able to piece it all together with those huge books of his. Emily, I don't know if it's my place, but I wanted to talk to you about John's visit to the lawyer this past week. Hiram accompanied John on the visit, and he told me that John did make some provisions in his will. Of course, you and Millie are to receive the majority of the money, but John also put $10,000 in a trust for Hattie, with Hiram as the director. That's why he went to the lawyer with John. John is also planning to travel to Chicago soon to consult with a world-class physician on stomach issues. He said he needed money for travel and payment and the like, so he also stopped at the bank. Are you accompanying John to Chicago? Lawrence is in St. Louis right now, and Hattie has moved in with us for the time being, so they don't need to keep a house here in Denver while he's gone so long. It must be so hard on a young wife to have her husband constantly travel. All my love, Kate.
So you take a packet out of here and put an entire packet in there with some warm milk.
What is the stuff even for? I mean, what's in it?
Mr. Witter's been trying to find a miracle cure for his ailments. This is arsenic.
Arsenic? Doesn't that stuff make you sicker? Listen, I heard of a lass down at Mrs. Smith's house, killed herself with the stuff.
I am following doctor's orders. This was prescribed by Dr. Wheeler, and I am just doing what the doctor said to do.
Guess they can afford to pay you to just do what the doctor says. Since everything in this house is nice.
Listen, my dear, Mr. Witter has noticed that some of his silver has gone missing. I heard him discussing it with Mrs. Witter just yesterday.
But you didn't say anything. And you wouldn't say anything. No, because you know that I can sing just as loudly about you as you can about me. How long do you think they'd keep a nurse if they found out she'd poisoned one of her charges? Oh, don't act innocent with me. It took me a while, but I finally figured out who you remind me of, Ida. Or should I say, Jane Ballow?
That was a mistake, and I was cleared of all charges. That medicine looked like candy, and little Bertha ate 4 pieces before I could do anything about it. Greedy little child. But I was devastated when she died.
Will you just keep that in mind before you go tattling anything to the mister? Besides, he doesn't have any proof that I've taken anything.
Just a word of warning. If they find out anything's been missing, you could be dismissed, or worse, arrested for theft again.
Oh, thank goodness, a letter from Kate. My dear sister Emily, your remarks about that carriage ride reminded me of something. Last week, John and Hattie went on another ride together. She had not yet returned, at least not yet before I went to bed. Around midnight, I heard a noise out back by the courtyard. I got up to look out, and Emily, I saw them. John and Hattie? Yes, John and Hattie in an embrace. Oh my God, how could he? Emily, I don't think that was the first time. Hiram has remarked on how close they seem. Dining out together, they've gone to the opera, carriage rides many times a week. John has never even been to the opera. He hates it. He has always refused to take me. Hiram and I saw John there with Hattie. He said you were sick and asked Hattie to go in your stead. That little trollop, not happy with her own husband, who is always away, so she has to take mine. Emily, I think it may be worse than that. I went into her room today and she was packing. I asked her if she was leaving to meet Lawrence in St. Louis, but she said she was going to Chicago. Chicago? But John is going to Chicago. Why, he told me that I couldn't go. Also, he could be with her. Oh my God, they're running away together. All that money he took out from the bank was for her and him to live in Chicago? I would rather see him with God than with that woman. Why, Hattie, are you taking a trip soon?
Oh yes, to Chicago.
And will Lawrence be joining you there? He's been gone quite a while, and it must be so hard to miss your husband.
Oh, no, I'm meeting a dear friend of mine. They live right on Millionaire's Row. Why, John, since you are also traveling at the same time, perhaps we can take the same train.
Interesting. Why, John asked me to stay home. Well, maybe it's because he'll have you to take care of him.
My damn stomach! I think I need to get a tonic.
You stay, my dear. There is one prepared right here.
Oh.
Here you are. This will make you feel better. Why, you may not even need to go to Chicago at all.
We shall see. Oh, the cook sure loves to use garlic. Oh, it tastes really strong. Oh, I feel sick. I think I should go late.
John, what is that? John! What was in that tonic, Ida?
You best call the doctor, my dear. He's not breathing. Mrs. Witter, here's the detective.
Mrs. Witter, Detective Sam Howe, Denver Police. I'm so sorry for your loss. But I'm afraid I have to report that my doctor and I have examined the body, and we believe that your husband was murdered.
Murdered? How can that be?
I'm going to need to ask each and every one of you to stay here. I'm going to be needing to ask you some questions, and please don't touch anything in the house. I'm going to be conducting a search and then interviews to try to get to the bottom of who's committed this rotten crime. Good evening, everyone. I'm Detective Sam Howe, Denver Police, and I've called you all here to help determine who killed John Witter. You will have your opportunity to ask questions. Just a moment. I'll be bringing each suspect in one by one. I'll be questioning them myself. I have my trusty record books here with me too. And after I'm finished, if you want to use that remarkable gizmo known as the chat to submit your questions, I'll make sure that they get asked to each suspect. But first, I'd like to start with the late Mr. Witter's nurse, Ida Whitaker. Would you please state your full name and occupation, Mrs. Whitaker?
Ida Whitaker. I was John's nurse.
Let's see. Ida Whitaker. Have we met before, Mrs. Whitaker?
I should think not.
Mr. Witter seemed a little old to have a nurse, don't you think? What was the purpose? What did he need caretaking for?
Well, he complained of a stomach ache, and I would prepare his tonics throughout the day as prescribed by Dr. Wheeler, his physician.
I see. And what was the prognosis from Dr. Wheeler?
Well, according to Mr. Witter himself, he was suffering from cancer of the stomach.
Cancer of the stomach. And did you prepare the tonic taken by John on the night in question?
Oh, no, it was already prepared and on that tray in the room.
And who else would create these tonics for Mr. Witter?
Well, I was his primary caregiver, but I was also training Belle to make tonics. And Mrs. Witter would also insist on making the tonics.
Insist?
Yes. John once told me that he hired me because he didn't want Emily to look after him anymore. He was always saying that she was working too hard, but I think he didn't trust her.
Didn't trust her? Why would he feel that way?
Well, he always said he felt worse after her tonics, but the ones I mixed him made him feel better.
I see. Who would get these medicines for Mr. Witter?
Well, Mr. Witter would usually pick them up from the pharmacy or occasionally have Mrs. Witter pick them up.
Did anyone have access to the tonic in question on the night Mr. Witter died?
The only other servant in the house at that time was Belle.
Belle Waltham, servant?
Yes, she was always sneaking around the house and up to no good.
Poisoning does seem to be a crime going around in this city. In fact, I just realized how I know you. I have a photo here. Looks remarkably like you, but the name isn't Ida at all, is it, Jane Bellows? Jane Bellows, acquitted of poisoning, one Bertha Jones, age 7.
Poor Bertha. It was all an accident, you see. They made those medicines look just like candy. But I swear I didn't mean for her to die, and I certainly didn't poison Mr. Witter. I enjoyed this job. His wife was always so resentful of me. Perhaps she's the one you should talk to.
All right, well, we will get to the bottom of this. Does anyone else have any questions for Ida Whitaker, AKA Jane Bellows? Anyone at all? No? No questions? All right. Let me see here. Then in that case, I would like to speak to the widow of the deceased, Mrs. Witter. Mrs. Witter, Mr. Witter had hired a nurse within the last few weeks. Is that correct?
Yes, he had hired Ida. I told him that I could take care of him, that it was my duty as his wife, but he insisted.
And what ailment was Mr. Witter suffering from?
John said it was cancer of the stomach.
And what was the treatment?
Well, Dr. Wheeler prescribed a number of medicines to be mixed into milk, tonics, water, or beef peptides.
Beef peptides. And who mixed these tonics?
Well, I did at first. And then John hired Ida, so she primarily mixed them.
And who mixed the tonic in the night in question?
I don't remember. Sometimes they would all be lined up ready to go, and sometimes we would make them fresh, especially if John wanted it in warm milk. He so enjoyed warm milk.
Enjoyed warm milk, but you don't remember who made the tonic that night.
No, sir.
Well, after searching Mr. Witter's office, I found this train ticket for Denver to Chicago, dated tomorrow. Was Mr. Witter planning on traveling soon?
Yes, he said he had found an expert in diseases of the stomach and was going to be gone for a few weeks to get treatment.
I also found a ticket in the name of Mrs. Hattie Hatton. Was she to accompany Mr. Witter?
A ticket in Hattie's name? But they just decided last night to travel together.
Well, according to the purchase slip, these tickets were purchased 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks? Oh my God, he was going to leave me for her. I knew it, I just knew it.
Leave you? Isn't she his niece?
They had planned it 2 weeks. I knew I smelled her perfume on his coat.
Let me see if I get this straight. Are you accusing your husband and your niece, Hattie Hatton, of having a romantic affair?
Yes, I am. Just ask Kate how much her daughter has been hanging around my husband.
Did this knowledge make you angry? Angry enough to kill?
How dare you, Mr. Howe? I am his loving wife. All I wanted was for him to get better. You better ask that trollop about the $10,000 John left her in his will.
Please calm yourself, ma'am. These questions need to be asked. Does anybody else have questions for Mrs. Witter? Mrs. Witter, I have some questions for my associates. Where are the tonic ingredients stored?
Well, we usually store them in the kitchen. Sometimes we have them in the bedroom. You know, we kind of keep them around because he needs a tonic at all different hours.
How did you know there was a tonic already there?
Why, it was on the tray in the room.
I see. Why were you so resentful of the nurse, Mrs. Whitaker?
I mean, she was doing my job. I'm his wife. That's what a wife does. They take care of their husband, their child, their home. That was my job as his wife, and I loved doing that job. And then he just hires Ida without even asking me.
Let me see. Any other questions? All right. Mrs. Witter, stay close. I may need to ask you more questions as more evidence comes to light. This Kate Witter you mentioned, Mrs. Hiram Witter, your sister-in-law, the wife of John's brother?
Yes, she just arrived back in Denver.
All right, very good. I would like to speak with her, if I may, if she's available. Wait a minute. One more question. Why did you say that you did not know Hattie was going to Chicago? You already knew from Kate's letter.
I didn't know they were going to travel together for 2 weeks. It was planned for 2 whole weeks. Hattie had just mentioned it the night before and asked John if they could travel together. But this appears to be a plot against me.
I see. All right. Like I say, stay close. We may need to talk some more. Please send in Mrs. Kate Witter, the sister-in-law of the deceased. Please state your name and relationship to the deceased.
Mrs. Hiram Witter, also known as Kate. John was the brother of my husband Hiram.
Did you have any reason to want your brother-in-law dead?
What? Why, no.
I have a few questions for you regarding the relationship between John, Emily, and your daughter Hattie. Mrs. Witter has made some accusations regarding the nature of John and Hattie's relationship and intimated that you have some information about that. Please.
I have reason to believe that John and Hattie were romantically involved.
And what evidence do you have for this?
I saw them once in an embrace, and it was not the kind of embrace that an uncle gives his niece. Also, they would go out on the town together. When I asked Emily about it, she at first said that John liked to introduce Hattie to Denver society, but then it seemed like the meetings were purposefully kept from Emily.
How did Emily feel about this?
I often reasoned with Emily to put the best face on the matter. She told me about John leaving her bed. She was frantic. At times seemed indignant, at other times broken down. Once she knew that Hattie was spending more and more time with him. She was worried that she would lose him. At one point, she said, "I would sooner lose him to God than to that woman."
Sooner lose him to God than to that woman. Now, as for your daughter Hattie, she experiencing some kind of financial difficulties?
No, not that I am aware. Her husband often travels, and so she asked to stay with Hiram and I for the time being. She just arrived last month, and she has plans to travel to Chicago tomorrow.
Was your daughter aware that Mr. Witter added a recent clause to his will, bequeathing her $10,000 upon his death?
Not that I am aware. Hiram and I don't talk business with her, but I don't know what John may have said.
Are there any other questions for Mrs. Hiram Witter this evening? Let's see. Mrs. Witter, why did you feel the need to tell all this information about the supposed affair to Mrs. Whitaker and not talk to your daughter?
I suppose it's the nature of having a young daughter, to know that if you push them too hard, they'll only shut down. Hattie and I were close when she was younger, but I didn't want to push her for information if she didn't want to give it, especially if I was wrong in my suspicions about their relationship. She would tell me if she wanted to.
Have you ever had any kind of relationship with Mr. Witter, Mr. John Witter?
Oh, none, no. No, he was my brother-in-law, and that was it. No.
Nothing out of the ordinary then. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Mrs. Witter. I'll be in touch if, oh, one more question, please, from one of my associates. Are you acquainted with the nurse, Mrs. Ida Whitaker, at all?
I've never actually met her in person. I have only ever heard about her from letters.
I see. Well, thank you again, Mrs. Witter, and I will be in touch if I have any further questions. At this time, I'd like to please speak with the other servant now, Miss Belle Waltham. Send her in, please. Miss Waltham, Ida Whitaker has said that she was teaching you how to make Mr. Witter's tonics. Is that correct?
That's not correct. She never taught me how to make those tonics, and if she told you she did that, Ida's a liar. My job is to clean the house and serve the food. I have nothing to do with these tonics.
Miss Waltham, you look very familiar. Have I had cause to come across you before?
I doubt it, Mr. Howe. I'm a law-abiding citizen, you know.
I see. Well, let me just check my book here. Yes, as I suspected, I have your photo here. I have made your acquaintance, or rather my book has. Miss Waltham, or should I say Miss Annie Treves? Let's see here. Arrested for vagrancy and fined $50. Referred to in the Rocky Mountain News as the shining light of the Demimonde. Sentenced to 2 years in the state penitentiary for killing Fred Jackson. Looks like you have a history of men dying around you.
Now you listen here, that was an accident. I wasn't trying to shoot Fred Jackson. I was aiming for Freddie Brymer behind him. And you know what? Freddie would have deserved it if I'd managed to hit my mark. You don't have any idea how often he'd come home to beat me. And I still have the scars from when he shoved me into that hot stove that one evening. So I took out that revolver trying to get Freddie to leave me alone. But the bullet went through his arm and hit Fred Jackson instead.
Well, Miss Treves, you were found guilty by a court of law. Your marginal marksmanship notwithstanding. Let's see what else is here. Attacked the landlord with a knife, sentenced to 1 year, but never served time because of ill health. And most recently, arrested for larceny from a person. You've been a bit of a bad young lady, haven't you?
Well, I ain't exactly been an angel, sir.
Indeed. Didn't the judge say, quote, he would put you out of the way where you won't annoy people anymore?
Guess it didn't stick.
Well, according to Mr. Witter's papers, he was thinking about sacking you for stealing. Is robbery just another one of your many crimes, Miss Treves? Is that why you killed Mr. Witter, to stop him from going to the police?
I swear.
Another mark on your record?
I swear I had nothing to do with the murder of John Witter. Sacked or not, I always find my way. I'd take another look at that sly creature, Hattie Hatton. There is something not right about the way she treats her uncle. I know because I've seen it. I heard they were planning to go away together.
Well, thank you for the tip, Miss Treves. Do any of my associates have any other questions for Annie?
What can I say? Everyone else must believe I didn't do it.
Well, this interview has been most enlightening, Miss Treves. What am I going to do with you? Stay close, in case I need to question you again. Now, before you go, though, I do have one question. My understanding is that the nurse did give you instructions about making the tonics.
And who told you that? Ida didn't tell me anything useful anyway. And anyway, I've never mixed a tonic, so it doesn't matter.
Who told you that Hattie and John were going away together?
I must have just overheard something. You know how it is being a servant. You stand in the background everywhere and nobody sees you, but you hear everything. It's a delightful way to learn about the family, even if the family's not so delightful, you know?
Well, like I say, stay close. Do not leave the residence without speaking to me first. Now I would like to speak with Mrs. Hattie Hatton. Send her in, please. Please state your name.
Yes, Mrs. Hattie Hatton, wife of Lawrence Hatton.
And remind me how you're related to the deceased.
My father and Uncle John were brothers, you see.
I see. Mrs. Hatton, I have in my possession some interesting evidence that says your relationship with the deceased was not perhaps as it seemed. Were you planning on leaving tomorrow together on a trip to Chicago?
Well, yes, I was.
And who were you visiting there?
Oh, I was visiting my old school chum, Mrs. Smith. That is, Florence Smith, a wife of Byron Smith.
And not traveling alone to Chicago?
Well, no. Once he had heard that I was traveling to Chicago, Uncle John offered to accompany me.
And what business did Mr. Witter have in Chicago?
I don't rightly know. It's not exactly like Uncle John talks business dealings with me.
And where is your husband, Mr. Lawrence Hatton?
He's away in St. Louis for business.
Is he often away on business?
Oh, well, yes. That is why I moved to Denver. That way I could be with my mother and father and I wouldn't feel so lonely.
Mr. Lawrence Hatton, H. Hatton. I have heard that name before. Here it is. Mr. Lawrence Hatton has applied for an alienation of affection suit against one Emil Strauss for $20,000. Would that happen to be your husband, your Mr. Lawrence Hatton?
Yes, he did sue poor Emil, but he had it all wrong. We were just friends. It was all just a big misunderstanding.
A big misunderstanding. And what about Mr. Hatton's fraud case? Was that also just a big misunderstanding? Why are you really here in Denver living with your parents, Mrs. Hatton? Is it because you have no money? Is it because Mr. Lawrence has threatened to divorce you?
No, it's not true.
And isn't it also true that Mr. Witter, your uncle, bequeathed a large sum of money to you just a few weeks ago, changing his will, money that you will only get in the event of his death?
Uncle John was just being generous.
Generous. Apparently, he was generous with other things as well, like affections. Mrs. Hatton, there's a letter here from your husband to Mr. Witter suggesting that another suit was forthcoming. Did Mr. Witter stop this incestuous affair, leaving you with nothing and prompting you to kill him?
I did not kill Uncle John. He loved me. He never loved that Emily. We were going to run away to Chicago together.
Did you poison his tonic, Mrs. Hatton?
I never touched his tonics. They were all prepared at home by that nurse or by Emily. I had nothing to do with the medicines.
I think I've heard enough, Mrs. Hatton. Do we have any other questions for this suspect? Let's see. Did you know how much money you would get from Mr. Witter's will?
No, I had no idea, but I do know he was a very generous man, but he never talks his business with me. I'd only heard that he had gone to the lawyer, but I had no idea what it was for.
I see. Did you know the nurse or the maid before they were employed by John?
Of course not. They're a nurse and a servant. I wouldn't rightly speak with them considering how much my husband travels. I barely have a household of my own, let alone to know the acquaintance of others' households.
I see. Any other questions for Mrs. Hatton? Mrs. Hatton, stay close. I may need to speak with you again. Oh, one more. Did John ever speak ill of his wife to you?
He wouldn't outwardly speak ill of her, but he said he never truly loved her, that I was his true love, and that when we went to Chicago, we would be together forever. And that is all I know on the subject.
All right. Like I say, stay close. We need to speak with you again. Well, I think we've seen all the evidence that we need to see, and I know how I'm going to proceed with this case, how I proceeded with it in 1887. Thank you all for your assistance. But before I go, we'd like to hear from you and your advice on who did it.
Now, before we reveal the identity of the killer, let's see who you think is guilty. Is it Annie Treves, masquerading as Belle Wilhelm, who killed him to stop getting another mark on her already quite blemished criminal record? Was it his niece and lover, Hattie Haddon, who had lost her money and was on the verge of divorce from her husband? Did she want the $10,000 bequest in his will, or was it his loving wife, Emily Witter, so resentful of her new nurse and aware of his affair with his niece? Did she kill him so that he wouldn't leave her? Well, let's see what the poll says. We are still missing a couple of people. So the audience seems to think that either Hattie or Emily was guilty. Well, let's reveal the truth. Tonight's program was based off a real crime in Denver that appears in Sam Howe's books, with some added twists and turns for dramatic effect. Well, in 1887, Emily Witter, age 38, was arrested for the murder of her husband, John, age 37. John Witter was the president of Pertran Norman Horse Company. He and Emily moved to Denver in the 1870s when it was still a relatively small town. John did complain of stomach issues and was diagnosed with stomach cancer, and the treatment for which was small doses of arsenic, according to his doctor, Dr. Wheeler. According to other witnesses, John was an inveterate taker of medicines. The trial was sensational news because the Hatters were a wealthy member of Denver society. Now, it came out in the trial that the family knew about John's affair with his niece, Hattie Haddon, age 25. That was all true. Mr. Lawrence Hatton was created for this story, but alienation of affection cases were widely used to sue men and women for adulterous affairs. John Witter did leave Hattie $10,000 in his will, with his brother Hiram as the controller of the money. John Witter hired a nurse, Ida Whiteacre, to attend him as he was getting sicker. According to her, he didn't trust his wife family. Ida's alternate life as Jen Bellows was created for this story. The real Ida was never involved in poisoning children, although the crime of children being poisoned by medicine that looked like candy was a real problem in 1895. There is no evidence that John and Hattie were going to travel to Chicago together, but according to witnesses, including Kate Witter, Emily was very afraid of John getting better and leaving her for Hattie. Annie Travis did live in Denver and did commit all the crimes listed in Sam Howe's books, except for stealing Mr. Witter's silver. She was added to the story for some spice and never worked for the Witters under a false name. Ultimately, Emily Witter was found innocent of the murder. Sam Howe clipped a newspaper article into his book and remarked "rotten" in the margins. He clearly thought she was guilty, even if the jury did not. So, who killed John Witter? Was it Emily, who was so furious that he was having an affair? Maybe he ended up slowly poisoning himself? Well, only his killer knows the truth. Sam Howe was an actual detective here in Denver. He served with the Denver police for 48 years and rose to be chief of detectives. During the early years of the police force, officers kept handwritten journals, but there wasn't a collective place for everyone to share information. Howe wanted to develop a way to keep track of the people he had apprehended and connect them with the other transgressions they had committed throughout the years. So he began meticulously hunting for connections and documenting them in scrapbooks. His record books helped solve cases not just in Denver, but all over the US. He retired in 1921 at age 81 and passed away at the age of 90. We hope you enjoyed tonight's event. We're going to take a short break for our 3040 Penn After Hours. We'll be back in March with an escape room-inspired event, Escape the Titanic. This event will take place in person at the museum, so be on the lookout for those tickets coming soon. And thank you so much for coming today.